Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has no winning plan for the war in Ukraine. US can provide Ukraine with security guarantees after the deal is reached. Meanwhile, Ukraine has agreed to a ceasefire. What is known about Putin's strategy in Ukraine and why won't this work to achieve a victory? Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has no credible plan for winning the war in Ukraine and is prolonging a costly, grinding conflict with no clear end in sight, according to a recent analysis by The Economist. The magazine reports that despite Russian offensives, Moscow has failed to articulate, let alone execute, a strategy capable of delivering a victory. In its assessment, Economist says Russia has locked itself into a cycle of large-scale assault that produce minimal territorial gains while inflicting heavy casualties on its own forces. Report argues that these operations, often promoted by the Kremlin as major pushes, achieve next to nothing and underscore a deeper strategic failure. According to this, Russian objectives in Ukraine have grown increasingly blurred nearly 4 years into the war. The sweeping early war goals of toppling Ukrainian government and capturing major cities have given way to piecemeal offensives that, in magazine's words, resemble an endless slog rather than a coherent campaign. The shift, The Economist writes, is evidence that Putin lacks a realistic path to achieving his stated aims. Also, the costs of this approach are mounting. Russian forces continue to suffer significant losses in manpower and equipment, yet The Economist finds little indications that these sacrifices are bringing Moscow closer to its objectives. Instead, Economist warns that Russia may be heading toward a long attrition conflict that could stretch well into 2026, potentially making it longer than World War I. The article also suggests that a broader reckoning may be unavoidable. The prolonged war, economic strain and heavy casualties could undermine Russia's military effectiveness and political stability, even if Kremlin remains committed to continuing the fight. While the Kremlin has insisted publicly that its campaign is progressing according to plan, Economist concludes that no such plan exists, at least not one capable of delivering victory. Publication argues that the war's trajectory leaves Moscow with few good options and no plausible strategy for forcing a favorable end to the conflict. Meanwhile, European governments are expressing growing concern after new reporting from Politico indicated US is conditioning long-term security guarantees for Ukraine on first reaching a formal peace agreement with Russia. The approach, according to sources, marks a shift in Washington's posture at a pivotal moment in the war. Sources told Politico that Secretary of State Marco Rubio convened the message during a private call with foreign ministers on November 25th. While US remains open to offering Ukraine a package of guarantees, Rubio said these commitments would be finalized only after a peace agreement is concluded, not before. The distinction, though procedural on its face, carries significant diplomatic weight. For years, Ukrainian leaders have insisted that binding security guarantees must be in place before any negotiations with Moscow can proceed, arguing that only firm external protection can prevent Russia from exploiting a vulnerable position. Several European officials told and warned that Washington's sequencing could leave Ukraine exposed, while it pressed to make difficult concessions. Politico reports that proposed framework currently being discussed with Kyiv includes provisions that have raised eyebrows among allies. Many of them are a cap on Ukraine's future standing army of 600,000 troops, restrictions that would not apply to Russia. One European diplomat describes the imbalance as striking and warns that it risks embedding structural weakness into Ukraine's post-war security. Other issues, the status of contested occupied territories by Russia and the use of frozen Russian assets, would be also deferred until after a peace deal. Political reports this sequencing, according to officials, could force Ukraine to accept terms without clarity on the resolution of core political disputes. Some European diplomats were especially critical of the direction of negotiations, telling that US-backed proposals lack meaningful reference to human rights, humanitarian law, and law standards. One official characterized the emerging framework as depoliticized and stripped of the principles we have all agreed to uphold. US officials speaking publicly in recent days have emphasized Washington remains committed to providing Ukraine with long-term security guarantees, and such guarantees would be embedded into any final peace agreement. They have dismissed concerns that US is pulling back or seeking to pressure Ukraine into a bad deal. However, according to Politico, European diplomats remain unconvinced. Many believe US is attempting to accelerate negotiations at a time when battlefield dynamics, political transitions, and alliance unity remain in flux. They worry that Kyiv could be asked to negotiate from a position of weakness while lacking the binding protections it has sought from Western partners since the first months of the war. The concern is not only about timing, but about leverage. If Ukraine enters talks before guarantees are locked in, several officials argued Moscow could demand concessions, knowing that Kyiv's security assurances are still pending approval from US. For European governments, particularly those bordering Russia, the issue goes beyond Ukraine itself. They fear US, if US adopts peace first, guarantees later stance, it could set a precedent that diminishes the credibility of Western security commitments, quote. If guarantees are transparent, binding, and front-loaded, they deter, one senior diplomat told Politico. If not, they invite risk. European officials have not publicly commented on the reported US demands, but Politico notes that the proposals challenge Kyiv's long-standing positions that any negotiation with Russia must be backed by clear and enforceable Western commitments. Without them, Ukrainian leaders believe Russia would simply wait for a moment of vulnerability to resume hostilities. The emerging divide between Washington and key European allies comes as Ukraine seeks to consolidate international support and shifting political landscapes. Election in multiple NATO countries, coupled with strategic recalibration in Washington, have introduced new uncertainties into what had been a relatively unified front. Politico report underscores a broader and urgent debate within the transatlantic alliance about how to structure a potential endgame to the war. While all allies agree that Ukraine needs security guarantees, they differ sharply on whether those guarantees must proceed or can follow a negotiated settlement. As one European official put it, speaking to Politico, quote, "The order matters. Without guarantees, first Ukraine negotiates alone." A burst of behind-the-scenes diplomacy between Washington and Moscow and Kyiv also has injected new momentum into efforts to end the war in Ukraine, even as key issues remain unresolved and fighting continues on the ground. Recent reporting across international outlets suggests US has taken a more assertive role in shaping potential settlement, a shift that has drawn mixed reactions from allies, according to multiple media reports by US and Ukrainian officials have held intensive talks in Geneva, where negotiators worked throughout an updated version of US-backed plan. Plan first drafted earlier this fall has been criticized by Ukrainian and European allies for appearing to mirror several Russian positions. Diplomatic sources told reporters the revised document is more balanced, though significant gaps remain. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.